Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Bible by the Week. We are in week 26, which means that if you have read this far, you have made it halfway through the Bible. Now, I know it seems a little bit strange because we haven't even come close to getting to the New Testament yet, the main event, but 2/3 of the Bible is the Old Testament, and it'll be still a couple months before we get into the New Testament. Nonetheless, the Old Testament sets the stage for and really ramps up the tension and the action in preparation for the New Testament, as all good literature does, even though this is a collection of 66 books written by over 40 different authors who weren't in collaborating with each other because it happened over a period of about 6,000 years. Nonetheless, there is this incredible unity to the scripture and this incredible drama. So let's get into it. This week, week 26, we are dealing with 1 Kings, chapters 12 through 22, and then 2 Chronicles 10 to 18. And you might remember that 1 Kings is more like the history of what happens during the period of the kings, and we really do get into kings plural at this point. And Chronicles is more something that's written later that really focuses on the kingdom of Judah. So it's a little bit like, in the Gospels, there are 3 accounts in the Gospels of the Last Supper where Jesus tells us, about communion and uses the same set of words. And then there's an account in one of Paul's letters to the Corinthians where he tells the story in order to make a point and to provide a teaching. 1 Corinthians is not a biography of Jesus. It doesn't tell the whole story. It doesn't give you the whole context, but it does pick that out in order to make a point. And that's kind of how Chronicles is. It's making a point about the descendants of King David, who are the rightful kings, and the way that the temple worship was set up, because it was written later when the focus was on trying to restore the kingship, the monarchy to Israel, trying to restore it as a nation, and also trying to restore temple worship. So in 1 Kings, we have Solomon. Last week we ended with Solomon dying, and Israel asks for a new king, and Rehoboam, his son, the whole nation of Israel has gathered in order to decide whether they really want him as a king. And what they ask is they ask him to lighten up. That is, Solomon had levied very heavy taxes in order to do all these building programs. He had conscripted as laborers those who were foreigners in the land. And so they asked him, Israel, to lighten up. They said, well, we'll follow you, but we need you to lighten up because your father really laid this burden on us. And all of the older advisors, the wise ones who advised King Solomon, say, yeah, that's a good idea. The people will love you if you do that. But Rehoboam listens to his buds. He listens to his friends, the young and foolish ones that are just as foolish as he is. And they say, here's what you are to say to them. You're to say, if you think my father was tough on you, you haven't seen anything yet. He whipped you with whips. I'm going to whip you with scorpions. And they said things like that. And the result was that all of the tribes, except Judah, the tribe out of which David and Solomon had come, all of the other tribes say, that's it, we're out of here. And they choose a guy named Jeroboam as king, someone who had been actually exiled for not towing the line. And he becomes the king of what becomes the northern kingdom, the 10 tribes. And Rehoboam is left with Judah. Now, it is geographically this large kingdom, and it does contain Jerusalem, and it surrounds the tribe of Bethlehem. So really, Bethlehem goes with Judah. But really, he loses the allegiance of all the other tribes. And this becomes a permanent division. The northern kingdom is called Israel proper. The southern kingdom is known as Judah. And the nation is divided. Now, since Jerusalem is in Judah, Jeroboam, when he's made king of the northern kingdoms, he decides that he needs to set up his own place of worship, because even though they know that all the people of Israel are supposed to worship at the one place God has chosen in Jerusalem, they figure, well, Judah's not going to let us worship there, and that's really going to, weaken our kingdom. So he decides to set up his own worship center, contrary to God's will. Even sets up golden calves. Remember them? Idolatry has not left the kingdom. And he sets up his own competing worship area. And a man of God, we're told, confronts Jeroboam about this unauthorized altar, and the king's hand shrivels up as a sign that he has violated God's will. And so he repents, and his hand is restored. On his way home, the man of God, and we're not told his name, perhaps because of the shame, he's deceived into disobeying God by a false prophet, and this results in the death of the man of God. So that's what the stories are in chapters 12 and 13 of 1 King. The prophet Ahijah in chapter 14, remember, we don't have prophets yet who are writing books. These are prophets that their words are recorded, if at all, in Kings and perhaps in Chronicles. He predicts disaster for Jeroboam's house. And sure enough, Jeroboam dies, and he's succeeded by his son Nadab. This is the northern kingdom. Rehoboam of Judah, the southern kingdom, also does evil in the Lord's eyes and dies, and is succeeded by his son Abijah. Now, what we have is this pattern in Kings where, kings reign and they die and they are evaluated. And so I'm just going to give you a short version of that. Abijah of Judah is evil. Asa of Israel, Abijah of Judah is evil. Asa of Judah is good. Nadab of Israel is evil. Baasha, who's an upstart, kills Nadab and reigns in Israel, but he's also evil. So it's not like he's a reformer. He's just in it for his own good. In chapter 16, Elah of Israel is evil. Zimri of Israel is evil. Omri of Israel is a powerful king, but he's even worse than all the ones before him, even more evil. Ahab of Israel is even more evil yet. And Ahab might sound familiar, not just as a sea captain, but he marries someone called Jezebel. And their wickedness just drives much of what follows in the following chapters. Elijah, the prophet, arises, and he predicts that there's going to be a drought because they've turned away from God. And of course, this is not popular. The whole economy is based on agriculture, which is based on rain. And so he predicts this drought, and then he flees because the king and his wife are going to kill him. First to a ravine where he gets fed by ravens, famously. They bring him food. And then he goes to a place called Zarephath, which is actually outside of the kingdom of Israel. And there, in a famous story, he sees a widow who has come, and she's I think I remember getting water, and he says, "Will you give me something to eat?" And she says, "Listen, I'm just here because I'm just about to prepare the last meal for my son and me with the last bit of oil and flour that we have, and then we're going to die of starvation." And yet, because he's a man of God, this widow is willing to give Elijah some of her food. So she bakes this cake and gives it to him, not cake in the sense we have, but you know what I mean, a bit of bread. And yet, God refills her oil jug and refills her flour container again and again for the 3 years, the remaining years of the drought, because she has shared what she had with the prophet Elijah, because he was a man of God. And one of the dramatic things that happens is that her son, whom she is living for, at one point dies, and Elijah stretches himself out on the boy, prays to the Lord, and the Lord raises this boy from the dead. And this is important because you might remember that John the Baptist and the coming of Jesus was to be heralded by Elijah, somebody with the power to do the incredible signs that Elijah could do, including raising the dead. So after 3 years of famine, Elijah confronts Ahab. Ahab has been hunting for him, trying to find him and kill him, thinking somehow that would relieve the famine. He just, hates the messenger of God because he hates this drought. It's destroying his kingdom. And Elijah says, "Look, let's do this. Let's have a showdown. You bring all of the prophets of Baal, the false god, the Canaanite god, the god who was supposed to be driven out when the people of Israel came to the promised land, and yet they didn't do it. You bring all those prophets to Mount Horeb, and Mount Carmel by the sea, and and I'll be on one side of the mountain, you be on the other side, and we'll both prepare sacrifices, and whoever's God brings fire down to consume that sacrifice, we'll know that's the true God. So they decide, well, this is a good idea. Plus, it's a spectacle. The people haven't been eating, so they need entertainment, right? And so they prepare these sacrifices. Elijah lets the prophets of Baal go first, and they spend all morning calling upon their gods, Baal and Ashtoreth, and pleading with them, and sweating and dancing, and even cutting themselves, always part of the occult, to try and get the attention of the gods. And meanwhile, Elijah's always over on his side, and he's mocking them. He's going, hey, maybe he can't hear you. Go louder. Or maybe he's relieving himself. He'll be right back. Or, maybe he's away on a trip. Maybe he's sleeping. And this, of course, gets under their skin. They keep trying. Nothing's happening. Elijah sends his servant. They get all this water. They actually build a little ditch around the altar. He takes all this water, drenches the sacrifice, drenches the wood, pours out so much water that it fills the ditch around it. And immediately God sends fire down to heaven to consume all of the sacrifice, all of the wood, and even all of the water gets lapped up by this intense fire from God. Well, the people of Israel are impressed by this, and Elijah says, don't let them get away. And he convinces them to slaughter these 400 prophets of Baal, the false god, striking a major blow against false gods in Israel. But of course, Jezebel, the king's wife, she hates this because she's a worshiper of Baal. She hates Elijah already, and so she vows to kill Elijah. And he flees then into the desert because he's stressed, he's exhausted, he's got PTSD over this death threat. God again sends him food, has angels actually minister to him, because Elijah is fleeing to Mount Horeb, which used to be known as Sinai, the place where God met. He's going there to talk to God because he is just burned out and overwhelmed. And so in this famous story, God sends all these physical signs, what we call acts of God, this huge wind, this fire, this earthquake. But God's not in any of those. Instead, God whispers in his ear and says, what are you doing here, Elijah? And Elijah says, I've been faithful to you, Lord, but I'm the only one, and now they're trying to kill me. And God assures him he's not the only one. There are 7,000 that God has reserved who have not bowed the knee to the false gods in Israel. And he says, I'll tell you what, do this. And he names a couple of kings to anoint, because that's what prophets do, right? They anoint the future kings. And they anoint these kings to be the replacement kings. And Elisha, who is one of the faithful ones, to be Elijah's successor. Elisha is a young man. He's wealthy. On his way back, Elijah finds Elisha. He's out plowing with oxen and in these fields, because it's a wealthy family in agriculture. And he calls on Elisha to follow him, to be his servant, his apprentice. And Elisha says, let me go kiss my father and mother goodbye. Now, this might sound like he's just, making an excuse, but no, he's not. He's ready to go. The fact that he knows that he's saying goodbye shows that he's ready to go. And to underline that, when he comes back out into the field, he slaughters the oxen, which were valuable animals, and he cuts up all of the plow equipment to make wood for a fire, sacrifices to God, sacrifice of thanksgiving, gives the food to all the servants to eat. I mean, we would call this burning your bridges, but I guess the biblical term is burning your oxen. So Elijah, has Elisha who follows him, becomes his servant, helps him. Elijah anoints Ben-Hadad, king of Aram, and the king of Aram and 32 allies besiege King Ahab of Israel, and they demand a ransom from him. And the Lord delivers Ahab and Israel, and he does it twice, 2 years in a row, from this foreign invader, to show that he's the God of all. But Ahab will not learn this lesson, even though he's the king of Israel. And so a prophet warns Ahab that his life is forfeit. So, uh, and just to illustrate the wickedness of Ahab and Jezebel, there's a guy named Naboth who, remember, you are not supposed to move the boundary zones or sell your inheritance in Israel. There's a guy named Naboth who refuses to sell his inheritance, but Jezebel wants the land. So she frames him and has him killed in order to get his vineyard. And Elijah tells Ahab that because of this, that dogs are going to lick up Ahab's blood on that land, and that they'll eat the flesh of Jezebel. Now, I just want to point out that only kings had dogs as pets. That dogs actually were not highly esteemed in ancient Israel, and much less so when Islam invaded the land. But this is indeed what happens. There is a battle where, the Lord, Ahab repents and the Lord delays the disaster, but there's a battle because Ahab prefers false prophets, those who tell you what you want to hear rather than telling you the true message of God. And there's a guy named Micaiah who is a prophet who tells him the truth about what's going to happen and that he's going to die soon. And so Ahab goes into battle with another king, but he disguises himself at the battle of Ramoth Gilead, and a stray arrow happens to pierce his armor and kill him in his what do you call him? Chariot. Yeah, that's the word. In his chariot. And so the soldiers take him back for a royal burial, and they wash out his chariot. Guess what? The same place where the prophet had predicted that dogs would lick up his blood. And they wash out the chariot, and sure enough, the dogs come along and lick up his blood. And when his successor takes over, Jehoshaphat reigns in Judah and does what's good. The successor to Ahab does what's bad. And when he does, Jezebel is thrown out of the upper window in the castle, and the dogs, they go to collect her bones later on, and the dogs have devoured her except for her bones. So it's a very gruesome story, but you can't say that God didn't warn them. In fact, that God wanted something different for them, but they kept turning to false prophets and false gods. Now, the Chronicles version of this is Chronicles 10 through 18. It tells the story of all Israel asking Rehoboam to lighten the tax burden, how it divides into two. It emphasizes that Rehoboam obeys God and does not attack Israel, but he secures Judah by building fortress cities. Again, they want to point out the good things that he's done. Meanwhile, the Levites are driven out of Israel. Remember, the Levites are the church workers driven out of Israel by Jeroboam, who creates his own priests and gods. So no matter how bad the kings of Judah were, the kings of Israel were way worse. After Rehoboam becomes strong, though, he abandons the Lord. So Shishak, the king of Egypt, is sent to plunder Jerusalem. We didn't have that story in Kings. Rehoboam repents. After Rehoboam, we're just told that Abijah reigns in Judah. Abijah has 400,000 men in Judah, but Jeroboam has 800,000 men in Israel. He comes and attacks them, but nonetheless, God gives Judah the victory because he is more faithful, because Abijah is more faithful to God. After that, Asa reigns in Judah, and he does what's right in the eyes of the Lord. He tears down the false altars to the false gods. He's encouraged by the prophet Azariah to remain faithful to God. He repairs the temple. He condemns, renews the covenant. But then he sends money to Syria in order to strike an alliance with them and have them attack Israel. And it's interesting, Hanani, who's called a seer, even though the word prophet is taking over more and more, Hanani condemns this lack of trust in God, and Hanani's put in prison for telling the king something that he doesn't want to hear. This is part of the thing about kings, is they don't deal with bad press well. They put anyone who says, even if it's the truth, even if it's to warn them, they put them in prison. They try to squash free speech. So Jehoshaphat succeeds Asa as king of Judah, and he is devoted to the Lord, and so the land prospers. And he allies himself, however, with this wicked king Ahab, who wants to attack Ramoth Gilead. That is the battle in which Ahab is killed. Jehoshaphat insists that they consult the prophets, and they all predict victory except for this prophet Micaiah, who's a true prophet of God, and he predicts Ahab's death. See, it's easier to find yes men than it is to find a true prophet of God, because the true prophet will tell the king what he doesn't want to hear. And again, despite Ahab, hearing Micaiah's message, he disguises himself. Nonetheless, he's killed by this stray arrow. So that kind of introduces you to this period of the kings. You are going to hear more stories like this. A common thread is that the kings of Israel and Judah are both wicked, but there are more righteous kings in Judah than there are in Israel. And that's something to keep in mind. I'm going to be printing next week a kind of a cheat sheet that summarizes all of these kings, because I can't keep their names straight or their lineage, but it's going to eventually show this pattern that we see in kings, that the big picture is really worth looking at. So I hope that you are enjoying it. Remember, you are now halfway through the Bible. Congratulations. I hope the Lord blesses your readings this week.